You're now listening to the Something Good Podcast Network. Please press any key to continue.
A kiss, as defined by Dan Webster, is something pleasing, a caress, a gentle touch. But there's another kiss that isn't in Webster's.
Hey world, we're Kiss!
Some critics say they don't make music, they just make noise.
Yeah, Kiss sucks!
Kiss implies the extreme in the theatrics on stage, utilizing fire and smoke and bizarre costumes, and the ever-consistent, constant concealment of their true identities.
Speaking of which, Kiss is going to have its own comic book soon.
Take Kiss with you. It's fun. Show your friends and be the first. Now.
Oh my God, no time to turn!
And welcome once again to No Time to Turn, a Kiss Nerd podcast.
Nerds.
Joining me as always is Cap and Alex from the Something Good For You podcast.
Yo. Hey.
And we're just been running down the line to exploring the history of Kiss album by album, year by year. And we are finding ourselves taking a little detour here.
A detour?
A detour.
No.
When there's no time to turn, well, there's going to be time to turn to detour.
I was waiting for that.
Hey, it's still forward momentum.
Yeah,
That's
there
right.
you go.
And we're going to look at this KISSTORY A&E Biography that everyone seems to be talking about. And now guess what? We're going to talk about it too.
Yeah, we'd be remiss if we didn't bring it up, on this show.
Yeah, and at least for myself, I have avoided all reviews and summaries and any sort of retrospectives of the documentary. I've watched the documentary twice, but I've avoided anyone's personal opinions. I think I popped my head into the KISS FAQ message board a time or two, mainly to promote the show. Hi, FAQ listeners. Right. So that's really the only time I bothered to even pay attention, but that was actually more or less to even get full references of unreleased footage that was shown.
Right.
So that was more or less the topics I was seeing. So the opinions I'm sharing is 100% my own, watching it and making notes.
So I'm the same. How about you, Cap?
And I'm just kind of, I watched it and I have my thoughts and on specific topics that'll be brought up too. And as far as reviews and things like that, I just been, kind of talking back and forth with friends from high school that were into KISS too about their thoughts on it, and just kind of things that we'll probably agree with here at the table.
I haven't really talked to anybody about it, and I'm the same. I've purposefully avoided looking at anyone else's opinion or review on it.
I'm actually kind of looking forward to it after we do this episode, because there's been a few people that did episodes that I'm kind of curious to see what they say. But yeah.
But of course, as fans, we eat this up because you don't see Paul and Gene doing, a lot of public, documentaries about their career like they haven't been in the last several years. It feels like,
Well,
on
I
VH1.
think that they were saving themselves for, I don't know, maybe for this. I don't know.
Yeah,
it seemed like the first time I heard about a KISS doc being made, documentary, it's easy for me to say, KISS documentary being made it's been several years ago, and I can't remember. There was a director tied to it, and I think it kind of fell apart, and I think it's because this guy was trying to come at it from a more objective perspective, which of course is not what we're going to get here. This is an A&E biography, technically. It's an episode of their existing show biography. So, I mean, and by design, it's going to be kind of, a lightweight kind of telling of the story. And I think, it's not to say that there isn't some interesting insights here, but I don't think none of it gets too penetrating, if that makes any sense. And I think it's by design because it's biography.
Yeah, it's a comprehensive tale of, two individuals that are about to retire. This is kind of goes into this last tour that they're doing.
It really is. It's primarily the Gene and Paul show, which I guess is what KISS is.
Yeah,
That's fair to make
it really
that
has
debate,
been since 1980.
Yeah, but it also comes off to me as in a sense scripted.
Yeah, there was one very scripted sort of moment that really kind of stuck out to me in both parts, which is you can tell that Gene and Paul were interviewed like 2 or 3 separate times when it was spliced in because they had different outfits on in different settings. The one setting that annoyed the ever-loving piss out of me was when they were hanging out in Electric Lady Studios, and Gene is wearing just a standard t-shirt and jeans, and Paul is wearing like no shirt but like a ripped up hoodie and like raggedy looking pants and like not his Pumas but like standard looking tennis shoes.
I don't even think he was wearing. Was he wearing? I thought he was wearing like socks or whatever.
Either way, he looked very casual.
Yeah.
And they were trying to look like they didn't have money. They were trying to put across that whole, because they were talking about the early days. They were talking about like Electric Lady.
I didn't notice that so much. I
think it's the producer editor thing in me. I noticed those little things, and they absolutely dumbed down their look some for those specific scenes. Because if you look at all the other ones, Paul's wearing his suit jacket. Gene's wearing all his labeled stuff with sunglasses.
I just thought it was curious at one point towards the end, and I see Paul, and he's wearing a hat.
Yeah, he likes that hat.
But he's also wearing a wig. Who puts a hat over a wig? No.
Well, it looks like he's got at least 2 wigs.
Paul's looks good. Paul looks good. Whatever, if he is, big deal, so what?
Yeah.
I think Paul looks pretty good. I think he would look better to just maintain that look even on stage, because his stage wig looks fucking stupid.
Well, I was going to say...
It's obvious on stage. The wig that he wears the rest of the time isn't quite so obvious.
Yeah. I do find it funny that he added gray to his daytime wig.
Well,
because I call it his daytime wig and his nighttime wig.
And how much is wig and how much is a weave or how much is whatever. It doesn't matter to me. That kind of stuff. A lot of we all like to make jokes about it. And there's certain Kiss fans that just get really hung up on it. Oh my God, they're wearing wigs. I'm just like, whatever, man. I get it, but at the same time,
nobody wants to see a bald Paul Stanley on stage either.
That'll go into some of the stuff that we'll talk about later. But I mean, at the end of the day, they look fine. Whatever.
For me, it just comes from the curiosity I've always had, even as a kid. Like, I always wanted to learn how the magic trick was done. It wasn't going to ruin the magic trick. I just wanted to know how it was done. And I think that's at least where my curiosity and the paying attention to the wigs and no wigs thing comes from. Is I'm not trying to ruin the surprise. I'm not trying to ruin the illusion. It's just, I'm curious. Is that still your hair?
The stage wig just looks like a fucking cheerleader's pom-pom or some shit like that, as shiny and frilly as it is.
I think that's more, I don't know. As they get older, though, and that's kind of my point with these things, it's like you're trying to retain some sense of your youthful self, but you end up kind of, the head catches the tail. I mean, Gene just looks terrible, and both of them look like they just smelled a fart. I don't understand what it is with that sour look on both their faces. It's just like they both just like they're like they've just been sucking on lemons or something.
Well, after having to deal with Ace and Peter and the things we know are factual after all those years, I feel like I'd be making the same face.
I don't know. I don't know. But I tell you what was very telling is, as it starts out, it has them playing Shout It Out Loud, and they're showing the current incarnation of Kiss.
With the Alive 2.
But it's the Alive 2 version that's playing underneath it. So the band shown is not the band you're hearing. So they're already going to if you're a Kiss nerd, you already know, okay, they're going to be blurring a lot of things here. And it's going to be, of course, stilted to their benefit. Which, I mean, again, this is theirs. Coming right out of it, this is a largely, I think, a self-produced effort in conjunction with A&E, which is almost kind of feels, again, just the fact that they're doing it with A&E almost feels like it's, almost, it's not as grandiose as what you would expect from Kiss. I would have preferred, I think it's cool that they did a 2-parter. It's a 3-hour documentary all put together. And I think if they could have done an objective 3-hour documentary coming from a third-party source or whatever, you might have something a lot more penetrating and a lot more insightful as to who they are. Right out of the top here, just them talking about their whole background stories about their families and stuff. Yeah. There's so much there that I think could be explored, especially with Gene being, an immigrant into America who's achieved the American dream.
Yeah.
To me, that's a fascinating story. It's, having parents that were
Or just his mother.
In Gene's case, his mom was in a concentration camp, which is just insane to think about. I mean, the odds being so thoroughly stacked against them. And even to this day, you see in some of these KISS message boards and stuff, a kind of an undercurrent of almost an anti-Semitic tone, like, they're Jews. And I'm like, I'm like, man, these guys, if you want to hate on these guys, you got a million reasons to hate on them. Their heritage is not one of them.
Not in the slightest.
If anything, that's something that you should applaud and champion, because, I mean, that's an amazing story. To come from nothing and to build something that they have is very impressive.
I mean, if we want to believe the tale, Gene semi-learning English from comic books and American TV, I mean, that even is a great part of the story.
It really is, and I just wish that they had explored that a little more. I know they're limited in their time, but it seems like they've rather trade that time that would be something that would be interesting and new and fresh for some stale old slingshot shit slinging that they do towards the end.
Well, so real quick, there was something you made mention of, and I actually had a note on it to a point. You were talking about since it was semi self-produced, if we had gotten something that was a little bit more objectified, or just a bit more middle of the road, and Gene and Paul didn't have like full editing process on it, it would have been a little bit better. I feel like whoever did do the final editing and the producing of the documentary tried their best to give Ace and Peter their side of it. Yeah. Because they picked very good archive audio for both Ace and Peter, even moments when Ace and Peter don't speak very highly of Gene and Paul.
Right.
So I feel like for as much as Gene and Paul kind of slung, the producers allowed Ace and Peter through their past words to do the same.
Yeah.
So I do kind of wonder how different it would have been if Ace and Peter had been involved, because it felt like they did get good representation, especially through Ken Sharp. Yeah. Ken was kind of the voice for Ace and Peter, it felt like.
Well, yeah, and I think also to a certain extent, I can't think of the guy's name, the Rage Against the Machine guy.
Tom Morello.
Yeah. Tom Morello. I think he did a pretty good job. That's the other thing I noticed in this. You've only got two quote unquote celebrity
musicians,
talking heads in this thing.
Yeah.
And one's Tom Morello, who feels like a genuine KISS nerd.
Yeah.
And then one is Dave Grohl, who feels like a paid celebrity spokesman endorsement or something.
I don't know.
And I'm not saying that he doesn't like KISS. I'm just saying it just doesn't feel like, when you see Tom Morello talk, he's animated, he's passionate about the subject. He's obviously he prefers the 70s KISS to the 80s KISS, and they don't do anything to mask that really so much.
No.
So, and he's got an understanding of the band, it seems like, that, whereas Dave Grohl's kind of more just like, and he talks about their show and yada, 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 in the same kind of, not abstract, but just almost secondary kind of way of speaking. I don't know.
But we have the budget to pay.
Like anybody would say that it's just, KISS has bombs and explosions and fireworks. We know.
I think there's a reason for that, though. And I think you're correct to a point, but I think that both Dave and Tom are the same level of KISS fan. The only difference between Tom and Dave, though, is Dave is friends with Paul. I think
Paul will get up on stage with the Foo Fighters every now and then, too.
I think Paul's dogma has rubbed off onto Dave.
I can see that.
So by the time Dave does his part of the documentary, he's kind of being Paul's second head, if that makes any sense.
Or celebrity
and I think
head.
that might be part of the reason he's a little more reserved in it, because I've seen the way he kind of reacts about KISS stuff, and when he tells that story about doing the mail order for the Kiss radio, and he talks about, he's like, yeah, I ordered it in, but it was a pay on receive or whatever,
cash on delivery.
Yeah, COD. He's like, I didn't tell my mom, and they like showed up, and it was like, you got to pay, and I was like, I never got it, shit like that. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like if he wasn't truly a Kiss nerd or Kiss fan to that level, it would never stick out with him as much. He wouldn't have had Paul up on stage in the past and things like that. I just think maybe Paul got to him. That may be true.
I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying the feeling I got, if I were not familiar with any of that, I wouldn't feel. It felt like to me that they was like, oh well, we can probably get Dave Grohl.
Mm-hmm. Let's pay
Dave Grohl's kind of gotten to be the go-to guy. He's the
new Henry Rollins.
The new Henry Rollins.
Pretty much.
I mean, I'm surprised Henry's not in it,
So we can pay Dave Grohl to be in this doc, but we can't fucking pay Ace and Peter somehow.
Well, so here's the thing.
Well, they declined.
They declined Ace, his own words, declined due to money. Ace says that they weren't willing to pay him enough. He said that on like a radio interview.
That's the story I've heard
too. That's probably true, and
I don't know
understand
how that
either, works. But
I feel there's a little bit of credence to it. I don't think Tom and Dave got a lot of money for it. I think they may have more or less done it for doing it.
Yeah.
And the other reason I say that is, it's no secret. We Kiss is among one of the hundreds and hundreds of bands that got screwed in their record labels when it comes to royalties and, song rights. Kiss does not own their music catalog, which is part of
they didn't get screwed out of it. They sold it.
Well, yeah, but they don't own their catalog, and that's why they even did those re-records when they did Sonic Boom, so they could do licensing, yada, blah, blah, blah.
That's pretty common nowadays.
So because of that, because they don't own the rights to their music, they would have to license it from whoever owns it, which I think is what Mercury, which is now
Universal,
I think.
Who knows anymore? These things get eaten up all the time. Yeah, so you get stock
whatever
music
big
all over this thing.
Yeah, there is royalty-free music and demo and live versions that aren't a live 1 and a live 2 all over this thing. And I actually made a list of every time we hear a Kiss song, not even a studio version, but a Kiss song, and we don't start hearing a lot of studio tracks until New York Groove, I Was Made for Loving You, World Without Heroes. Those are the first real studio tracks you hear. Everything else is live or demo, for the most part.
I think that's how it's been for the longest time, too. Even like when I would watch VH1 and VH1 Classic, and old Kiss videos would come on, it would be nothing from the old catalogs or anything like that. It would be, straight up, like you said, 1979 through the, present era at the time.
Yeah. So I wonder if just how little money they may have had for it if they weren't even going to license out a lot of Kiss songs for the documentary.
With an A&E budget and not a fucking Netflix budget or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and also I think the reason they went with A&E was because Gene probably still had a relationship with them because of Family Jewels.
I forgot about that too.
See, but that also goes into why I think they're so easily... I don't know. That's why I got that scripted feeling, that reality in quotation marks kind of a thing. It's
I can see what you mean.
It's not necessarily scripted, but they go ahead of time and go, we got to hit this point, this point, this point.
Yeah. And they put on a face and all that.
Yeah, and then they gotta follow a line. So it doesn't even feel like that. When they film their conversation, like you said, they're sitting on the sofa or whatever. That felt like completely a staged and scripted thing.
And that was the reason I said it even felt staged and scripted all the way down to their clothing choices.
Yeah. Which is actually what I noticed about when they're telling their backstory about where they grew up in New York. They're showing like this footage of an impoverished New York where it's like broken down back streets with
70s
abandoned
New York.
cars and and I'm like, these guys grew up middle class. They didn't grow up like that. They're making it look like these guys had this hard, and I'm sure that it wasn't an easy thing, again, with Gene coming over as an immigrant. I'm sure like the way he initially has it set, but I think...
But he was doing all right. He was working a job and all that.
But by the time he was, in his teens, I think they were all solidly, fairly comfortable middle class. I mean, Paul's parents, his dad, I think, ran a furniture store, if I remember right.
Something like that.
That sounds right.
But I mean, it's still, it serves its purpose, whatever. But it just still, again, it kind of makes it look like they're a lot more tough New York street kids when they really were kind of middle class, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it just seems like stop selling that. They show this picture of Gene, and it's in almost every documentary now. It's Gene with his Kent Beetle bass.
Yes.
Why do they show this? It looks like it's a backwards picture. It's always the same backwards picture. I'm like, can we not flip it by now? He's holding he's holding it where it's almost like left-handed. And I'm like, that's got to be backwards, man.
So there's talking about that. I didn't make a note of this, but it reminded me. We finally see an unedited Paul photo we've seen in a lot of documentaries too. The photo of Paul kind of taken from the right side. You see his big mutton chops. It's black and white, and it's kind of zoomed in close on his face, and he's smiling. It's usually in reference to like young Stanley Eisen, and then young Gene Klein, that kind of shit. They finally showed the unedited one, and there's a friend of his next to him, a blonde-haired musician friend.
Yeah, I didn't catch that. But
yeah, so it's like I saw that in the documentary. I was like, oh shit, that's a fully unedited photo.
They mentioned Stephen Cornell.
Yep.
Of course, he's the guy that made the connection for those two.
Right.
They, of course, conveniently omit Stephen Cornell's criminal record.
I was going to bring that up, but yeah.
That's fine. There's no room for it here.
No.
I was just honestly surprised he got mentioned in light of that.
Well, yeah.
That was more or less
probably
my
gotten away. He probably could have got away with them just saying we met through a mutual friend.
Yeah.
But whatever. I mean,
either way.
What was interesting here is you get your first kind of unseen footage that I kind of marked on was this footage of Peter Criss playing in his first band, the Brotherhood.
Yes. And
where did they source that from? I wonder.
I bet you Lydia.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I didn't look at the credits enough to say.
That was the first wife.
Yes.
Lydia. Yeah.
The reason I say that is because she's teased in interviews in the past that she has a lot of reel-to-reel footage of them like on a plane and doing traveling. Well, and what did we see in this documentary?
I've seen that footage, some of that before. It seems like somewhere else, but I can't remember where. So.
Yeah, like small, faster clips, nothing in full like that. So I'm willing to bet that she probably handed over a few tapes.
Probably so.
And if so, great on her. That's great.
Though. Yeah. I mean, to see this footage of young Peter playing in a club band, that was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They say which one, or does that even matter?
It's called the Brotherhood. The band was called the Brotherhood. Yeah, and it got the big red letters behind them saying that, so it was pretty neat.
Yeah, that was a moment too when Ken Sharp was given the backstory and the explanation, which is why it kind of led me to kind of go like Ken seems to be the voice for Ace and Peter since they declined to be part of it.
That was a smart choice, I guess. He's done some. I mean, Ken Sharp was writing stuff for like Goldmine magazine like 30 years ago.
That's I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's where I first remember seeing his name. So he's been doing a lot of stuff for a long time. Mm-hmm. He's written books on Cheap Trick too.
Well, it's funny. I didn't know he was like such a predominant member in like writing stuff. All I knew him from was just an active member in the FAQ, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh wow, this dude is actually hot shit.
Oh yeah. And the stuff he's done has actually been really excellent.
It really has been. And talking about the Wicked Lester stuff, us being Kiss nerds, this kind of rang true for me. I had the note saying overly dramatic music when discussing Gene and Paul leaving Wicked Lester, as if the band was about to dominate the world and just decided to shelve it. It felt like they were really making that more intense and dramatic than it needed to be.
I know it.
I didn't notice that. Did they use any of the Wicked Lester music?
I noticed. No,
because I'm not super familiar with that stuff because it's not my go-to jam, yo.
Yeah, I know.
And
I only know the two Kiss songs.
I used to have a bootleg that had all of that on it.
I had to download
it. Like the flute solo and She's just in my head right now as we speak.
Yeah, they were playing some sort of generic kind of thing with that. And I was like, I wonder if that's. I don't think that's really Wicked Lester because it goes right into generic New York Dolls music, which isn't the New York Dolls, but it's a. It's a cop of a New York Dolls riff.
And again, it just makes me wonder how much money they really did have to spend on this if they're using all this like royalty-free sound-alike stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why, but who's making that call and how is those decisions made? Who knows?
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that bugs me about it being a TV thing. And again, remember, this is still an episode of biography.
Yeah.
We're talking about it like it's this great grand Kiss documentary. It is to a degree, but it is at the end of the day. These are still episodes of biography.
Well, it's also
It's
the first time
two-parter
we've
episode
had
on biography. You know.
Well,
And-
this is also the first time we've had any sort of biography since the farewell tour. Because during
well,
the
I'm saying
farewell
A&E
tour,
has a series called Biography.
right? But I'm
This
saying,
is
but
just
for
part
but
of their
for Kiss,
series.
but
so
for us Kiss fans, we
this is
haven't
their
had
first-
something like
yeah.
this since
Well, that's
2001, 2002.
Right, and that's why I'm saying it
Yeah.
seems like it's kind of like we're being shortchanged a little bit. And a lot of
makes
people
sense.
might sit there and say, well, big deal, so what? You're not hearing the actual dolls. But it just seems to me that, it's just you're noticing these cost-cutting corners, and I just feel like somehow that, once you get that kind of vibe, if you're that deep into it, you're wondering, okay, where are we going to go with this? And
just so I don't harp on it later on in the episode, just get it out of the way now, since I am in video editing, one of the things I have to do sometimes is, especially for different clients, is go through and find royalty-free background images, footage, and audio to use for their videos. And the scenes of a record player, of like the record spinning kind of like top down, it kind of had like a bluish kind of hue to it, and the scenes of the girl hanging out of the car, both of those are like free to use things that like I've literally hit skip on going through websites. And that immediately took me out for a couple minutes because I'm like, whoa, I've seen this exact footage before and I could have used it for free.
well, here goes my point though about this. Even with the cost-cutting measures and everything, I still feel like this is a really well-made doc.
I was about to say, if
I didn't get to finish my point here.
I'm
It's
sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm like, even with all this stuff, there's a lot of stuff I realized I found myself going, okay, well, I can forgive that.
Yeah.
So I can forgive the dolls thing. I can even, it's curious to me that we're getting a generic rock track and generic Kiss music all through this thing. It feels like one of those, I don't know, like there's this glut of these documentaries from Britain where they're like music case studies and all that, where they don't have the actual music and they got like,
that would just drive me nuts.
Or those old
interviews and
Kiss
stuff.
unauthorized DVDs
where
you
they're
used to
like,
get.
yeah. So I'm like, well, we're dealing with the real band. Can't we get the real music? But anyway, all things considered, I still think this is pretty well put together.
No, I fully agree. I just wanted to get those small little gripes out of the way so I wouldn't harp on it later on in the episode.
They talk about the dolls here with a snob superiority that I think is unwarranted, where they're like, and we saw them and we knew we couldn't look like them, but we knew we'd kill them. And I'm like, where does that come from? Because let me just lay it on you here, man. Kiss weren't that much better than the dolls, man.
So
as musicians, which I'm okay with, I think the snob superiority of musicianship and rock and roll has really served it bad. This kind of, European kind of idea of, you must be an excellent musician to approach your craft. And I'm like, man, it's rock and roll. And, it's populism. It's
always been the story with the dolls. It's like they look great, but they sound like shit.
No, they didn't. They sounded fucking great. They were a great goddamn rock and roll band. And anyone that doesn't understand that doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, has no business talking about music. I hate that shit.
I totally agree with you, but we hear it over
I'm
and
gonna
over.
say it right here, right now, and I don't care. I get all the hate mail you want, but fuck Van Halen. God damn it.
I love you, Russ.
Fuck
No
that. I want to hear
comments.
dirty rock and roll played by fucking street urchins that are barely getting by on whatever.
Jerry Nolan and Peter Criss were boys too, up to a point.
Now Peter Criss and Jerry Nolan were, the story may be apocryphal, but they say that Jerry Nolan was a left-handed drummer, and of course Peter was a right-handed drummer, and they didn't have enough stuff. They set their drum kits up side by side and were sharing the floor tom and stuff. Huh. And they were, there's a lot of pictures of them together.
I was going to say, I'd love to find some photos of that.
I think Jerry Nolan was Peter's best man at his wedding. There's pictures of that.
I'm reading.
Certainly one of the whatever they call it, groomsmen or whatever.
Yeah.
So I actually made the same note you did about New York Dolls. I said Gene and Paul refer to New York Dolls as being visually great, but we will kill them when referring to being them out of the music scene. But they're also very quick to admit that it worked for the Dolls and not them.
Yeah,
so
well,
that
that
was
look.
one thing the look.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I did appreciate about them is they were at least selective on a few things to be hard on themselves on. Like they were very quick to admit that look did not serve them, but it was great for the New York Dolls. It doesn't work for us.
And,
that kind of thing.
And to be fair, all the bands in New York were kind of trying to cop that kind of thing at that time. And I don't even know for certain that the Dolls were the guys that brought that to New York. I mean, I'm always figured it that way, but I know that, before the Dolls, there's kind of this gray area in New York, music history or whatever that kind of comes out of post Velvet's.
I was going to say
to the Dolls, and there's the missing link in there is Eric Emerson and the Magic Tramps, who I don't know anything about, but I've read their name, and I know, and I kind of always got the idea that they were sort of the ones that first started bleeding in the kind of androgyny thing. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that for a fact, so don't hold me to it. But I'm just going off of But I know by that point there was the Harlots of 42nd Street and the Brats.
I think they name drop them in the doc too.
Yeah, and there was a scene for it. But and what's interesting is they're showing this New York scene. And of course, they're saying we were never part of the New York scene, which to a certain extent is true.
I thought that was true.
But they're showing a lot of CBGB footage in this in that part. And
I noticed that too.
The club wasn't even open then.
No.
and CB's was really never part of that kind of glam circuit.
Yeah.
Now, there was, they talk about them playing at the Coventry in Queens like it was like outside the normal. Kiss didn't play the Mercer Arts Center and they didn't play Max's, which is kind of curious. But the Dolls played the Coventry. The Dolls played the Diplomat.
Yeah.
These bands were all kind of following each other, and I assume they probably played the Daisy too. I don't know, but they're kind of making it sound like they were in finding these places on their own and kind of making it happen. But the Coventry was the Queen's spot for all of that. So
yeah. Well, real quick, so I can just keep up with your notes. If you're already to them talking about the New York Dolls and stuff, I had a couple little quotes that really kind of stood out to me. One was when they were talking about all the gear getting stolen. This was before them talking about New York Dolls in documentary. Paul responded to the question of why he followed Gene to upstate New York after the gear theft. And Paul said, because I knew I was stronger with you, and even if you didn't quite see it at that point, that you were stronger with me, quite honestly, I was more concerned with me, and it was better to have you with me than me alone. And I just thought that was rather interesting of Paul to kind of peel that back and even kind of be forthright with Gene in front of his face going, I would have done that anyway.
Well,
it's like I needed to follow you.
But that's him asserting his position in a way that's a little different than has been presented before by others that were around in that time that kind of have painted it that Gene was the leader almost, and Paul was like the baby brother that was following.
Yeah.
But
that's what it sounded
like.
Who
was putting down the majority of the ideas. And that still may well be true. I mean,
yeah.
But who's to say at this point, they're not going to give you any real hard truth, again.
But they had some real moments in a lot of spots in the doc, particularly Gene.
Yeah. And another note I had was Paul finally corrects his Flash and Balls newspaper ad statement.
Well, whatever.
I just find it funny that for years they've used Flash and Balls, and finally he's like, Flash and Balls. But they wouldn't run balls.
I know.
So I'm like, whoa, after all these years, you finally admit it.
I doubt that he even used it to begin with. I mean, but again, that's kind of a big deal. So what? You can get on Google and find they're old scanned images of the old Village Voices, and you can find that ad. It's
Just a couple of clicks away. We're about to do that right now.
It's more than a couple of clicks. You have to really know how to find it.
Oh, okay.
But it's like I find it funny
it
that
helps
within
to know the date of the issue. But I found it once when I was like bored one night, and I was
and I know like on the FAQs, I've seen it throughout the years. People finding it and posting it. They're like, it's not flashing balls. It was flashing style,
flashing ability.
Ability.
Oh, but
even I'm getting it wrong.
And they don't mention Bob Kulick at all in this, which is interesting. Bob Kulick apparently was going to be the guy until Ace showed up.
See, the one
if the story is always to be believed.
So I've heard it was Bob. I heard it was some guy that couldn't speak English.
No, they mentioned Bob because Bruce is in there, and even Bruce makes mention of my brother Bob showed up and was doing stuff.
I didn't catch that, but.
And actually, directly after the New York Dolls thing, Paul shares another story about his ear. Paul brings up that ear story like 3 or 4 times in the documentary.
Well, he was very self-conscious by it. He'd been bullied by it, and I can understand that. That's left a lasting. I think it has a lot to explain with why Paul Stanley is kind of the way he is.
I think 100%.
That it really devastated his self-esteem as a child to the point that it's fed his adulthood.
It gave him an inferiority complex.
It gave him a major inferiority complex.
It birthed the star child.
And I think it's interesting. They kind of imply this, and they don't really state it to a greater degree. But I mean, I think that the sense of when they put on the makeup, it gave them a sense of being something they weren't, and they could project that much more easily through the theatricality of it all than who they actually were. And I think that in Paul's case particular, that he felt like once he took that makeup off, that same little, fat kid from Queens with the bad ear comes back out, and that's who he felt like he was. Even though at that point he was even without the makeup, he was Paul fucking Stanley, but he didn't know that. Everyone else knew that, but he never knew that, which is really interesting and kind of sad.
And it is interesting too, kind of to work off your point. You see those early photos of Paul, like even before Wicked Lester days, like where he's talking about being like anywhere between like 16 to 18. Even then, you look at him and you're like, okay, yeah, he's got a couple extra pounds than what he would have in his 20s, but like, he still kind of looks like a rock star. He still looks like you said, Paul fucking Stanley. Yeah. This is Paul Stanley with some big ass fucking 60s mutton chops. Yeah.
Well, it's just interesting that they would, you wonder if they would have been able to have become something with that mindset without the theatricality. Because I have argued that if you could have had Kiss in 1975, that energy that they had on stage with the same songs and everything, and still had a successful band, would it have been as large and as huge as Kiss became? No, probably not. But would it have been a successful band? Yeah, I think most definitely. The question is, would they have the wherewithal within themselves, or would Paul at least have the wherewithal himself to feel confident enough as himself to do that? But it seems like my point is that the makeup and the theatricality is what gave them the confidence to become the band that they became.
And on the conversation to makeup, this is another interesting note I made. One, we get to hear Gene share his love for classic horror movies and comic books, something that we honestly haven't heard him talk about in a while. Like in any documentary or interview, he's not really discussed his love for classic horror and comics, which he did for the first time in this again. That was kind of nice to hear. And then immediately they were complimentary of Ace's makeup, but immediately made fun of Peter's makeup.
Yeah, they take they go out of their way to dig on Peter on this whole thing. All the way through.
They kind of let Ace shine and be a little better.
But it is funny the way Gene does it. He goes, I like cats. I'm like, yeah, come on. It was funny, but Jesus Christ.
He kind of gives Ace a voice too. He's like, wow, I got a car game.
He does the great Ace impersonation. But I think
he likes impersonating because he also does Doc too.
Yeah, but coming through this whole thing, and I've got this in my notes towards the end though, is that across the whole thing, both episodes here, it's clear to me that Gene really still loves Peter and Ace.
Yeah.
He's still very he pines for that, original chemistry. For all the headache and everything, he'll sit there and nod his head and go, yeah, it wasn't worth it. But he does, it's very obvious to me that's, he just has a strong love for those guys.
He was the one that pushed for them to play at the Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah, well, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But then conversely, Paul ain't having it, man.
No.
It's interesting that, they don't mention how Paul wound up playing on one of Ace's recent albums.
Mm-hmm. He did that version of Fire and Water.
Yeah, and, but I don't know who knows what the relationships are. I know Paul has been pretty forthright in saying, I don't like Peter. It's just basically what it comes down to. I just don't like the guy.
Yeah.
Where do you go with that? Okay, I can understand that. You don't like Peter. Okay, I get it. But
yeah, and it's really hard to argue that point, because I've met plenty of people that just after a while I'm just like, no, I don't like this person. I don't want to be around them.
But the thing, they go over the same, they talk about how they did this, that, and the other, and they do it over and over again. It's all they've got, and it's like, well, okay, this, that, and the other. I can see it got, I've heard a lot more worse stories about Peter, not through Paul and Gene, but through like other roadies and stuff. Them famously or infamously, I should say, I guess, where they'd have to basically wheel him out of the hotel in robes, and they'd have to, of course, cover his face, you know, and so they came up with the nickname, the Ayatollah Chris Cola.
Yep. I've heard that one.
And, it's like, I get it. It was probably very difficult, but prima donna behavior isn't exclusive to Ace and Peter. I mean, they at least own up to their own kind of faults to a certain degree in this thing. But it's like, okay, how do you own your own faults and not cut some slack for the other guys?
I don't know. I feel like this is where I wound up getting confused with everything. Is where/how is bringing up something that honestly to me is an important part of the history of the band. And we have to assume, much like when Cap and I do our Something Good episodes, we have to assume that every episode could be someone's first episode. This could be someone's first real deep dive into learning about the history of Kiss after only knowing a couple.
I'm sure there was a 14-year-old somewhere that's just getting turned on to this, and he's like, all of a sudden he's got this, what he sees as this giant treasure trove of information for him to dive in on.
So the reason I feel like they bring it up over and over is Ace and Peter's drinking and drug habits throughout the 70s did lead to their departure, whether it was firing, quitting, whatever. I'm not here to debate that.
I don't think that's the sole reason, though. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Let's just kind of move along here. I'm going off of some stuff that I noted as it came along. They go into talking about them making the Alive album.
Not a lot of album talk leading up to it, other than their first Electric Lady experience.
I had something in there that.
Well, I've got a note about Alive.
There's a story that Gene tells in this.
Yep, I have that right here. It says, after finished recording Alive, Bill Aucoin wasn't sending Neil Bogart the master tapes. So he calls Gene on the phone. Gene responds by saying they were owed radio royalties, and once they were paid, they would send the tapes. Allegedly, Bogart replied by saying, listen, asshole, you don't know who you're dealing with. You're going to send me those tapes, or I'm going to break your legs.
He said Bogart said that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just think that, I mean, that may well not be true. I don't know. We know that they were in a lawsuit. We've talked about that on other episodes. We know that there was acrimony there to a certain degree, but they both really recognized that they were supporting each other and needed each other. And so it seems like that was, a surprisingly hostile reaction. But I think what Gene's trying to get across there is that it's because Bogart had his ass in a sling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the note I had right before that says, alluded to by Gene and Ken, that Neil Bogart was making deals with the mafia to keep the record label afloat.
Yeah, that's not a big secret.
Yeah.
Or at least that's
been alluded to.
Always been
quite
alluded to. I mean, but he was also gambling too. We talked about how he went and gambled.
Made payroll
off of gambling the little money they had.
Yeah, I like that they got Eddie Kramer and the big producers in their
Eddie
career on
Kramer
board
and
too.
Bob Ezrin. It was great to see them there.
It was great, and I thought it was interesting because I was under the impression over an interview that Bob Ezrin gave a couple of years ago that him and Paul Stanley were feuding Or at
I've read
least
those-
they
I've read
weren't
that too.
feuding. Paul was beefing against Ezra, and Ezra, of course, I don't think
Ezra's at a different spot in
he's
life.
at a different
but
spot. He's just like, okay, you hate me, okay.
Yeah.
I'm Bob fucking Ezra.
I'm Bob Ezra.
his attitude is so great.
but I think it's cool that they had him involved in this. Because those are the two producers that defined Kiss more than anybody, and to think that. But give the weight of each one. If you've got two producers that have defined the band, and one of them is responsible for 3 or 4 albums, and the other one's only responsible for 2.
Yeah,
that's a But I see the pluses on both. We'll talk about that in the other when we go into these other episodes on No Time to Turn.
and it's like we've already done Destroyer, so we can kind of talk on that one for a second. I love how Bob, in his segment, perpetuates the myth. He was like, yes, I had a whistle around my neck. Yes, I called them campers. Yes, I whipped them into shape. Like, he was just like, owning it up to it.
Yes, I was doing cocaine.
Yeah, even then he was like, yes, I was doing a lot of cocaine, and even with some of the members, and then cuts to audio of Peter talking about doing cocaine with Bob Ezrin.
Yeah. Well, hey, I mean, it was what it was.
Yeah.
1975.
They're and then you see, and this is kind of bullshit too. It's like Paul starts talking about, well, yeah, but he was a functional addict, and I get it.
I know,
it makes sense. He
heard-
goes, he shows up, he does his job. Everything is working on a time frame, and he's observing it, whereas the other guys are kind of ambivalent towards it. I mean, again, we've talked about this in the Destroyer episode. Well, it hasn't yet aired yet.
The upcoming
Destroyer episode. You got to wonder. It's like, how much use of Dick Wagner was there, and at what point did Ace recognize this and go, well, I'm not coming? No, you've already, but who knows?
And Ezrin acknowledges it in this documentary. He goes, it was difficult to record Destroyer for Ace, and refers to him as the ultimate rock and roller.
Yeah, I think, Ace always responded better in his own telling of it to the production style of Eddie Kramer.
Yeah,
who allowed him to find that spot, whereas, it was more rigid and more disciplined coming from Bob Ezrin. I think he had a hard time with that. But that's a matter of schematics, I guess. It's a matter of
and they actually give Bill Aucoin a lot of credit for the early marketing. Like,
well,
that they could have
because
taken the chance to own it for themselves. I thought.
What the
Just like the big the merchandising.
you mean
and everything.
their eagerness to do it? You mean
The eagerness. Well, I can easily see Gene and Paul taking ownership, going like, yeah, so we started marketing the band and putting out T-shirts and comic books and lunchboxes.
They were all gung ho about that, but they didn't make any money off of it.
Yeah,
That's something
Aucoin
they won't
did.
admit.
Yeah.
I don't think they don't seem to want to admit. We'll talk about that in some upcoming episodes.
Yeah.
of No
But
Time to Turn.
I felt like that was a moment they could have rewritten history and taken it on themselves to say they did it. But I thought it was good that they gave Bill Aucoin proper credit in that also.
Well, he's the guy that made all the money off of it.
Yeah.
They were paying him. They were paying him commission to run their merchandising.
Good job, Bill.
and another
That he owned. He owned it. They didn't own it. He owned it.
Another great quote from Paul, kind of in this area of the documentary. It goes, fame doesn't change you. It allows you to be the asshole you are.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, well, that's owning their own shit there. That's pretty.
Yeah.
That's very telling.
Yeah,
Jane
'cause-
talks about how his ego got the best of him quite a few times.
Let's go back to the merch for a second, because Dave Grohl makes an interesting comment about nobody can out merch Kiss, and I'm like, wait a minute. That, Kiss gets all this heat from people that want to they're just all about blah blah blah, and I'm like, there's nothing that Kiss is doing or has done that hasn't been done by the Beatles. Nothing, not a single thing.
Or
I don't think the
Save for
Beatles were doing it
maybe
then.
save for a pinball machine, even to now. But I'll go even one further. Grateful Dead. There's nothing the Grateful Dead are that is a merchandising juggernaut. Anyone that thinks any different is just fooling themselves.
Oh no, Elvis, Beatles, AC/DC, Grateful Dead, all of that.
I'm like, why do these groups get credibility that Kiss don't?
Well,
because
I think
Kiss was probably the first through the door with it.
That's what I was going to say. So it's all time and perspective. In the 70s, Grateful Dead wasn't doing that. The Beatles weren't doing it.
Well, the Beatles had done it, but they weren't around
not
anymore.
to that extent.
Oh yeah,
though.
absolutely.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, dude, they sold Beatle wigs for Christ's sake.
Well, I knew that one. Yeah,
You know, you could.
But,
I mean,
but
there was
but
all
I didn't know how
kinds
much
of,
that was really involved by the Beatles. I thought that was kind of like a
probably
magazine
not.
thing.
I don't think it was as well managed or as well maintained, but I mean, certainly it was there. I mean,
but I think that's why Kiss gets all the credit and the heat, both the positives and the negatives for it all, because in the 70s, I mean, Gene said it best in a lot of different things. They wanted to be Coca-Cola, you know? So it's like,
I think with Kiss too, it's like they were a hard rock band, you know, and not the Monkees.
That is probably where they also kind of went sideways. Is again, we'll talk about this as the show goes on, as the other episodes. But you know, that just their perception of being very much kind of they're coming out of post glitter, post glam, whatever, and they're kind of an anomaly in that they have this image that no one else has ever happened upon before, and they're really driving it home. And you're seeing stuff. And I think we've talked about this. Well, we will if we haven't. You know, the photo shoot where they're with the girl in the bondage gear, and she ends up naked in it. They would never have done that by 1979.
No.
I mean, allegedly they kicked Sammy Hagar off of opening that tour at some point because he was using the F word in front of all those kids.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like
Sammy Hagar,
they
too.
were very, they were very complicit. That's the thing they don't seem to show much ownership over, is they were very complicit in that moving the band in that direction, what is euphemistically been called quote unquote super Kiss. And I think that that was it was all by design, and they knew where they were going with that. There was no way they can say they weren't. They're trying to pass it off like it was outgrowing them beyond what they could control. They were fully aware of what they were doing. Did you notice there's a part when they're talking about Dynasty and they show Paul's purple whatever you call that.
Yeah, but
thing.
like a new shot of it, like he still owns it.
Yeah, I'm like, do they? I mean, I can't imagine them having created a new one just for one single shot in that thing.
No,
that was
I'm
pretty
sure
surprising
it's
to
the
see that
original.
pop up. It's like because I thought they had sold all that stuff.
There's a couple of cool little fan moments there with Paul. Not only that, but with his guitars too. Where they show the original Iceman with like all the broken glass in it that Paul would cut his fucking hand on.
Yeah, that was cool when he broke that out. That was really cool.
Yeah, if we're kind of up to the Dynasty area, a few little minutia points that I've noticed, I brought up to you a little while ago, actually a few weeks ago, and you were like, oh, I didn't notice those. Interesting audio edits. One of them being they changed the Megadoll music. It didn't have the Kiss, that's the name, Kiss. It didn't have that in the background, but it still had the announcer voice.
Yeah.
When they did the Kiss makeup commercial, it still had a little bit of Rockin' in the USA in the background, but it was the same riff looped a few times. Like it wasn't played out like it was supposed to. Same thing with the Kiss radio. It didn't have Love Gun behind it. It was some royalty-free song. And the biggest one that I don't think either one of y'all would have noticed, and honestly, I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't watching the special on my computer with headphones, so I could really hear things really well. There was a point in which they were heading into Winterland footage, in which the announcer was muted, but you could see it. You know what I'm talking about in the Winterland footage. The announcer
he says, welcome our special guest tonight,
Kiss.
Yeah.
You see him. His mouth is moving, but all you hear is the crowd.
Yeah.
And then you hear the audio bump in. And then immediately after, there is a drum machine or a programmed drum around the 39-minute mark of the first special that's mimicking Peter's jazz shuffle of 100,000 years.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, I don't think many people would notice it, I wouldn't have.
That's weird. I don't know why they would go and take the time and trouble to do something like that.
Because they don't own the bit.
I know, but I mean, why even take the time and trouble to recreate it like that? I don't know. I mean, that's you're talking about again.
But that's my job. I want to point out the minutia.
Okay. All right. So that winds up the first episode of it, and it goes now into part 2.
Mm-hmm. And they kind of, the editing even going into part 2 kind of annoyed me, especially just knowing what's going to be coming up. They made like the ending of it sound like there was going to be an all-out brawl between the band.
So ominous.
Yeah, it's like they had like the speeding up music behind it and the fast cuts and the.
I didn't catch that so much. They show the footage. I've seen. They use this in the. What's the one that came out in '92? The Kiss.
Extreme
Kiss
close
and
up.
Yeah,
and
there's that great footage of them. It kind of, I think, tells all where they're walking towards the stage. They come out of the backstage area, and it's like an upper view looking at them. And Paul comes out, and he's gung ho, and Ace is kind of like, yeah, let's go. And Gene's coming out, and he's kind of, he's just sort of gearing up, but he's pulling Ace along by the hand, and Ace, or not Ace, excuse me, but Peter by the hand, and Peter's just like fucked up or something. He ain't there. I mean, it's like he's on his feet, and I don't know why or how, but it's just kind of sad to see.
Yeah.
Now,
there's something that we'll probably wind up forgetting to even talk about when we get to our Dynasty episode, and I feel that this is a decent time to bring it up because they talk about it in the documentary. With as much archive audio there is of this band, and there's a decent amount of archive audio from the Dynasty tour, has no one found audio of Peter speeding up and slowing down that song? Because I've heard that story so many times of Peter intentionally speeding up and slowing down a song, but I've never heard audio proof of it.
Well, they didn't record every single show. I mean, that's all. A lot of that's just bootleg quality
but
stuff.
That's the moment that's referenced a lot.
I know, but I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I mean,
because we have Peter's blow up during Beth,
and I know that. I believe that to be a true story. I don't doubt it. He talks about Peter throwing sticks at him if they got in front of him.
Yeah, in front of the drums were a no-fly zone.
Yeah, I think Peter had I think, like he said, I think he didn't recognize it in the moment, but he had just completely burned out, and I think it wasn't just burned out on playing in the band. I think all the excesses, all his lifestyle was burning him out. And I think he's pretty forthcoming about that in his autobiography.
Mm-hmm. And Ace too,
but Ace was still rolling.
Another little
Peter,
Paul quote here.
If you look at Peter's drumming in any of the existing recordings or footage from like the Alive era versus the Dynasty era, and you can see there is a very stark and noticeable decline.
Ace is still fine.
But Peter, man, that drumming on that Dynasty tour, and I've heard some bootlegs from the Dynasty tour where it's pretty hot.
Yeah,
and he's there, but and you don't know exactly what it is that's causing it. I'm sure it was a confluence of a lot of different things, from the lifestyle to the lack of inspiration or whatever. He's probably not real super excited to be there. Maybe, who knows, to just being, he's 4 years, 5 years or whatever it is older than all the other guys.
Yeah.
I mean, all that's going to catch up with you in some way or form when you're, when you're used to operating at a certain level, and it's going to be harder and harder to maintain that level. But, what are you going to do?
And another just random Paul quote I found interesting. He goes, "Peter made it hard to love him."
Well, yeah, I've heard that. I'm sure that's probably true. I just seems like
because it's true doesn't mean it's not supposed to be in the documentary.
Well, I guess my issue with it is that it's almost still done at the expense of them owning their own shit. Like, they own a lot of their own shit, but at the end of the day, it's still well, I wouldn't have spilt the milk if he hadn't have brought it to the table.
Fucking Peter.
And it's like, it doesn't make, or whatever. It's a bad analogy, but I'm just trying to say, I think everybody had their, I have a very strong feeling about this, and this is something I'm kind of saving for the other episodes, but in my opinion, and they make, okay, here's the quote from Paul. It's an all for one thing, and he said, and it got tested, was this thing. And I'm like, no, it didn't. It didn't get tested. If it got tested, it wouldn't have stood. And if you really believed all for one, one for all, you know what you would have done? You would have gone, okay, this has ran its course. We're as big as this is ever going to be. There's nowhere to go but down now. Let's just stop.
Yeah.
Stop.
But Paul saw it
Break
as
it
his,
up. I was debating this with a friend of mine recently about, had they broke up after the Dynasty tour, could they have come back in 1996 and still have been as successful?
Yeah,
I think so. And
I think they
the
would
guy I
have
was
been
talking to
just
was
as
like, no,
big.
with them disappearing, what made it was that they were still there. I'm like, no one cared about that.
But Paul even says in the
It
doc
would have
that-
been bigger, I think, had they broke up in 1979.
You're probably right, but Paul says in the doc and in his book and everything that Kiss was his lifeboat.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't going to quit.
But I think, and that goes into that idea of his own self-esteem. Could he not recognize the value that he could have had as a solo performer?
And I agree with that.
And I think he would have easily been able to transition. I think at any point in the 80s, Paul could have transitioned into a solo performer with the same level of success that Kiss had in the 80s, because their success in the 80s wasn't that remarkable.
No.
It really wasn't. Especially when you compare it to what all was going on by the mid-late 80s.
And they'll admit to that.
Even before we fully hop into the 80s.
I don't want to jump that far
Yeah,
ahead.
I know. There's interesting, though. It says Paul blames the shift in character alter egos, talking about getting Vinnie Vincent and Eric Carr. That's why I'm leading into it. He blames the shift of character alter egos and the music from The Elder for the band sliding down the unpopular slope. Not that the music had declined greatly from the mid-70s.
It had nothing to do with them changing members.
I think that's the only bit of the documentary that annoyed me, is they kept blaming member changes and alter ego changes for the band failing at that time.
I think it just the thing is that the Kiss fad was over. And that's the thing you have to recognize, is that for marketing towards that audience the way they did, they set themselves up to be exactly what they were, a fad. Now, that doesn't mean to say that what they were putting out wasn't good. You can debate that all day long. There are people that hate Unmasked, and there's people that hate Dynasty.
I actually really like those records. I was listening to them the other day.
So okay, that's fine. And Unmasked wasn't a successful record in America. And the Dynasty tour wasn't a successful tour. A lot of people don't recognize that. For what it was set up to be and what they anticipated it to be. No, they weren't going to hit any B markets with that tour. They were going to do multiple nights in all the big cities. You were going to have to come see them, and then they realized, oh, that's not going to work,
because they were so used to that.
And so they had to go back and try to make this thing work on a, it was over. The fad was over, and that's why they had the decline. And they don't acknowledge that. And Kiss as a fad was over. Now, the whole concept, that doesn't mean the concept doesn't still work. That doesn't mean the concept is broken. And, the thing they don't acknowledge in this documentary that's very important is that, they went, and this is the genius of Bill Aucoin, they went to great lengths to get those makeup designs as registered copyrights, like with the, as a trademarked image. Mm-hmm. No one else could use it. I think the same with the logo. No one else can use that double S logo. It's a legal, that's a registered copyright. They own the trademark on that. And that was not an easy thing for them to do, because there was no precedent for it. And it took them several years to do it. And then within a year of them doing that, guess what? Oh, I think we're going to take the makeup off.
I know it. But
Which was an insane idea.
That's the only thing that worked for them in the 80s, though.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I disagree with that. We can't prove me wrong, and I can't prove you right. This is just my feeling. Even Vinnie Vincent, who I'm not fond of as a guitar player, I don't like that shred style of guitar playing. But I watched in this documentary, I brought it up again, seeing his character and performance on stage. He was a performer. He brought songwriting, he brought that style of guitar playing, which of course is what they were looking for by this point.
I was honestly surprised he got a mention in the slightest.
Well, I know you got to. I mean,
well, with how much they've been suing him and everything else,
you got to get an. It's part of the. He's a part of the history, recorded history.
They even mentioned Mark St. John.
Yeah, well, they gave Mark St. John exactly 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh, you counted it?
Yeah. I was like, I wonder how much time this guy gets. He gets 30 seconds. But Mark St. John didn't have any impact on Kiss. None. Vinnie Vincent had a huge impact on Kiss. Now, of course, the great debate is, did Vinnie save Kiss? No. Vinnie did not save Kiss. Vinnie wasn't there long enough. The Lick It Up album, I don't think. I mean, it had the novelty of them without makeup, but I'm looking at him as a performer, even in makeup. Had they not taken the makeup off, yeah, things were going to get soft, but I think the rebuild would have occurred regardless. And I think they would have probably sustained pretty well, because what came hot on the heels of them dropping off the makeup, like straight away, and I can remember this, you guys don't because you're too young. Everyone was talking about, oh, have you seen the new Kiss? Have you seen the new Kiss? Have you seen the new Kiss? And I'm like, yeah, the new no, the new Kiss. Motley Crue. Motley Crue, everybody I knew referred to them as the new Kiss.
They had the stage look
because
and the
they had
makeup
that
and all
look.
that.
And I'm like, and so that wasn't passe for Kiss. It was passe because they believed it, because they were so desperate to just cling to anything that was going to give them any chance of survival. And the other thing that no one ever talks about is that the reason why this was also important was they had switched. Their record company had gotten bought up by Polygram, and Polygram had a deal with Kiss that was in place. And I'm talking off the top of my head here, so I might have some of this wrong, but we'll go into this more when we go to The Elder. But they had to maintain 3 original members for their recording contract to remain valid. And they got a gigantormous fucking amount of money on this coming into it up front, when they really probably didn't deserve it.
I think Ace talks about that in his book.
That's why they had Ace do all that promo stuff, and they were trying desperately to hold on to him, because if he was gone, guess what? Everything got restructured. And when it did, oh boy, did they get fucking beat the fuck up on that.
And it's interesting too, because Paul mentions that without mentioning it, because I've heard that story before, but it's not talked about a lot. But Paul, he says after Peter, Ace, and Bill were out of the picture, it genuinely scared him.
Well, and it just underlines every reason they should have just stopped. But they were at that point, I think they were looking at it less from an artistic point of view, if you want to use that word, to a financial point of view.
Yeah.
And because they were getting killed, they also, at some point, they had created some tax shelters for themselves, and then they had a change of presidential administrations that came in and said you can no longer use that as a tax shelter, and now they owed those taxes retroactively.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, they got beat the fuck up.
Yeah, they don't talk about that.
Well, of course not, because they're not looking at. They're trying to preserve the idea that Kiss, the integrity of Kiss, that Kiss is this, But no, at this point, this is their lifeline. They've got to do something that's going to help them.
It was Paul's lifeline. Gene was going to fuck off and do movies.
So what do? They promote the first Lick It Up show with a poster and makeup.
Yeah, that one also kind of is weird to me, because I find that hard that people still didn't know what was going on. That was pretty big news. I mean, to a Kiss fan, they were taking their makeup off, but
that's still such a slight on the promoter, though.
Yeah, to use that poster, but I would think that those people knew that Kiss had.
Well, I don't know. So there feels 2 sides of that coin. So was the populace that aware to the point where the promoter should have known?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. Yeah, I'll tell you, when I found out about them dropping the makeup, you know how I found out?
On the record cover?
When I went to the record store and saw the record cover, and I was like, holy fuck.
So imagine...
Dude, you don't understand. I was like, okay, let's see. That was 83, fall of 83, so I had just turned 12 years old.
Yeah.
And I was still pretty young and naive and kind of like, whoa. And I remember way we would find out they had Kiss records. There was no internet or nothing. It would either, I never even saw magazine ads for Kiss that much.
Yeah.
So I would go to the record store and flip the records, and it would be a new Kiss record. Like, look what we got! And then you take it and run to your friends and look, we got
make copies.
There's a new one. And And I remember I was flipping and I saw that, and I remember I put it back real quick and I ran out of the record store, and I was like, I was almost like I got caught looking at a Playboy or something. I was like, I just saw something I wasn't supposed to see.
I saw them without their makeup.
I was thrown completely sideways. Now,
So, but imagine if you had seen that show 3 days before you went to that record shop. Right.
So I guess it's possible, but I mean, I don't know. Who knows? It's an interesting story either which way.
And they definitely gloss over the 80s stuff. So I don't have a lot of 80s notes, but a note that I made by this point is, and this is us, or at least me, showing love to everyone, Tommy Thayer comes off as extremely likable in this documentary.
Well, I think all those guys are probably likable. That's not my issue with those guys. I don't, But I just wanted to say something. I watched the Rush documentary, and it's like I just found out Geddy Lee's mom passed away, and I was like, I want to give that guy a hug because they just seems like nice people. I never feel like that with Kiss. I hate Rush. Yeah, and I love Kiss, but I don't want to. You know what? I
kind of want to meet Gene.
I don't want to meet any of those guys, but I'd love to hang out with the Rush guys. Does that make sense? So even I could hang out with Tommy Thayer and talk about what Kiss nerds we are. Yeah. Even though I think what he's doing is completely blasphemous, but he's got his own thing to fucking.
I want to read hearing his story when that comes out. Yeah, really bad.
Here's what's interesting to me is like you go through this and. Paul has his ear surgery around this time. And who goes to visit him? Gene. And what does Paul do? When he's talking about it, he still takes little snipes at Gene.
I noticed that because he said something like, he was the only one that came in and visited me. And Gene was recalling and said something like, so in so many words, he said, now I know who my real friends are. And then when it comes to Paul, he's like, well, I may have been high when I said that.
Yeah, I'm like, fuck, man.
I know. I'm like, why can't you just let him at least have it?
Paul is so fucking hypocritical on some of this shit. He's like, he wants everyone to make way and take notice of his poor ear. Now it ruined his life and everything. And okay, that's all kind of valid to a point. But guess what? Cut some of that same slack for other people, Yeah,
because this is the same time period where Gene was running off trying to be a Hollywood movie star. Well, so it's like he was already disconnected.
Why is Gene doing that? Because he sees that Kiss has probably reached its end and he's looking for next chapter.
Yep.
And it just seems like everything here is, if you look at it with hindsight, it's like, this is your stop point. There's nowhere to go but down from here. And it doesn't matter how successful you think you are, because let's face it, for whatever success they had in the 80s, comparatively to all the contemporaries of the time, Kiss were on the also ran. It doesn't matter if they had we had a platinum selling record with this, that, and the other. Everyone was having platinum selling records back then. That was the norm.
Music industry was booming.
The music industry was booming.
Every
just
hard rock
because
band
you
had
had
3
a
million
million
albums.
selling record, but most bands had like 8, 7, 10 million selling records. Bon Jovi's did the
White Snakes of the
White
world
Snakes
and all that.
And even the young bands that were like Cinderella and stuff like this. These are bands that all were eclipsing Kiss in their success. And they sit there and go, oh, well, they had a platinum record with Crazy Nights. Well, big deal. So what? I mean,
my mom did too.
It's like, but Gene makes this great admission in it that I was really surprised, where he says we were no longer leaders.
Yeah, he admits it. The thing that we've talked about for years,
and it's just, it's just interesting that they can recognize that, but it's like all they're doing is surviving through the 80s. Their records are subpar. They're not making anything that feels like Kiss music to me. They're making music that wants to ape what other styles are going on. You can hear it. It's very obvious. We'll talk about this as we get into the 80s era on No Time to Turn. But
and then later, by this point in the documentary, they start talking about Eric Carr's sickness.
Yeah.
And this, honestly, was the first time I heard the Eric Carr story and felt emotional about it. Because I've heard them talk about, like on Confidential, The Second Coming, they always talk about his death in any major biography or documentary. But the way it was framed and like hearing them talk about it and the clips they used, for the first time I actually felt a little emotional watching it.
Well, it's a sad story.
Yeah.
I mean, really, here's another example. Eric Carr seems like he was
a genuinely good dude.
I've
by
never
all
heard
accounts,
a negative story about him.
You know, and he looked like, you know, my memory of him coming into the group, and they kind of painted like it wasn't really widely accepted, but I can remember in my little circle of friends at least, and this doesn't of course speak to the Kiss fan base at all, but just in my little, you know, my little tiny world, but it was almost like it was a vicarious thrill to this, because it was almost like, you know, one of the, you know, this unknown guy, could have been anybody, got brought up and became part of Kiss, and
it probably also felt like it did, like when CJ or Marky got back in the band. It's like, oh, the Ramones have a new member. That means they're not going away anytime soon. They're about to have a new era.
I think this is a little different because it was Kiss. I mean, it was like, you know, it's a whole new persona and everything. They had to create the new persona for him.
No, that was a negative, Russ. It was because they didn't put the Peter Criss makeup on.
I know. That would have been, see, that's the thing that was very cynical to me, and we can talk about this here in a minute, but, you know, Eric Carr had an identity in that band, and I'm not a fan of his drum style, especially compared to Peter.
Watch out.
Well, no, wait.
People are about to come at you.
That's fine. They can come at me. I don't mean it. I don't think he was a good style for Kiss. I get what they were trying to go for. If you know, you don't notice it so much on The Elder because, little known secret, he doesn't play a lot on The Elder.
Yeah, he did. He wasn't happy with it either.
Well, that's neither here nor there. He had no say. He wasn't brought in as a full member. He was a paid employee, but what he brought was still kind of an identity. You know, he maintained an identity that gave him, you know, more credence than even Vinny. But Vinny never had a chance. No. He never established that.
He tripped straight
character.
out of the gate.
But I'm just saying, but that's not his fault. I'm just saying they dropped the makeup straight away. He only did the tour where he had the makeup on. So he never had a chance to develop that identity and become somebody recognizable to the fans as such. You know, I think that Eric Carr probably wouldn't have had the impact on Kiss or on the fan base if he had not had that initial identity, because he was part of the quote-unquote original Kiss just by virtue of having a character.
Yeah.
And he was allowed to be that character. But then again, they don't talk about this, how much they suppressed his desire to be a contributor, a contributing member of Kiss in the terms of songwriting and not just performing drums, but to sing.
Because he had a great voice.
Yeah, they gave him some lead vocal spots, but
he had his Black Diamond moments.
They could have given him a lot more room, you know, and let him develop more as an individual. But of course, why would they? Because he's just an employee.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of rumors swirling around how they handled that when he passed away.
I've read some of those over the last few years, and that's almost one of those where it's like, I don't kind of want to believe it because it does feel just like really money shady.
Well, I don't know. I you know, I don't want to comment on it because I don't know the details on it. But I mean, other than to say that, you know, Eric Carr seemed like he was a pretty cool guy, and I you know, again, he seemed very likable,
and especially for
Bruce
the fact
Kulick
that he was
very likable.
Well,
Absolutely.
that was my next note. I said Bruce Kulick seems extremely hurt talking about the reunion tour.
Well, let's jump that far ahead yet.
Okay,
I'm just talking about, you know, these guys are likable. I'm not a fan of their input, and I don't necessarily put the blame on them for that, because it's still the Paul and Gene show. It's really Paul.
Yeah,
Paul has taken over control of Kiss here, and you know, as they you know, he implies in this, or the implication is made in this documentary, that he produced Crazy Nights, which is interesting because he didn't.
Yeah, they even show like that MTV clip of him talking about producing it.
Yeah, and but you know, he's definitely in the driver's seat. But it's interesting because as you come out of the Revenge album, you know, everyone talks about, well, they finally found who Kiss was after. We'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah.
But almost immediately you come out of that and they go into what?
The Unplugged,
the convention tour. And then what are they talking? What is the whole convention tour set up towards?
Classic Kiss.
Classic Kiss. The point is never more explicitly or clearly made that none of the 80s matters compared to, I mean, none of the 80s would have even happened, or no one would even care if it hadn't been for the 70s.
Even Tom Morello mentions that. He goes, with grunge, starting to come its way in, we were actually wanting to be accepting of Kiss because they were different and off the beating path.
Well, it's also, I don't know,
because of just the craziness of it. So I found it interesting that even he was like,
Kiss had a huge influence on that whole generation.
I think so.
That they don't make mention. The first tribute album that came out was called Hard to Believe. It was completely independent of Kiss, and it was all it wasn't entirely Seattle bands, but it was this what was then the nascent grunge thing, and it was punk and grunge or pre-grunge rock.
Even
bands.
Nirvana,
but Nirvana's was a piss take. They were making fun of Kiss, and Dave Grohl doesn't play on that. That was their original drummer, Chad Channing. I think that's the only recorded version of Nirvana that has Jason Everman on it, their second guitar player, that was in Nirvana and Soundgarden.
Huh.
And,
well, damn.
Yeah. And I think
I was going to say, you've got a little bit more 90s knowledge than I thought.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Another guy from
nerd. And but the conventions happen, and it's almost like it's foreshadowing. Now that the wheels are starting to turn, and they're looking towards, okay, we've got one last card to play here, because it's not happening for them. And I don't care what anyone says. It doesn't matter how successful you think they are. Kiss are starting to trend towards club level. It's just the truth of it. And what do they have that's going to be their salvation on this? And here's the question. They come out of the convention tour with Unplugged. They get offered to do MTV Unplugged. Would that have happened if they couldn't have gotten Ace and Peter to participate?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think it was designed for Ace and Peter to participate. That's the only reason why they even put this thing together.
And little preview for over a year from now feels like when we wind up getting to that record. One of my top favorite records. I love Unplugged.
Really?
I love that record.
Interesting.
I adore it.
So, this whole thing is obviously, money motivated, which is fine, whatever, because they did it right. But they, everything is steered towards this reunion, and I'm kind of going off into opinion mode. I'm pulling away from. I knew I was going to do this, so y'all need to slap me back in line.
The reunion footage and the reunion story that they depict in the doc is very, very interesting too.
Yeah, well, before we hop into that one, the last major quote I have saved, I feel is the most important quote in all of those 3 hours. So it was right after Bruce was kind of talking about, feeling a little hurt about, the reunion tour happening. And then Paul says, kind of leading into the quote, he goes, I know it upset Bruce, but I know Eric was really hurt by it, and kind of explained how he was a session drummer, but how he actually kind of felt like he belonged with Kiss, which honestly did kind of feel like that when you look at it from the outside in. But Eric's quote was so profound. Like, I paused it and I rewound it a few times going like, one, they allowed him to say that. Two,
it's very cynical.
He goes, Kiss is Gene and Paul's band. They are always going to do what's in the best interest for Gene and Paul, not Gene and Paul and Eric.
Yep.
People say it's called music. People don't say it's called music friends. It's called music business.
Yeah. But the thing is like him and Bruce both had to know this was inevitable.
I feel like that's how...
Bruce seems like I think the reason why he was so stoic about it was because he knew this was coming. But
I feel like Bruce's character he felt like it was coming, but didn't want to believe it. I feel like he was lying to himself a little.
Maybe, I don't know, but Eric Singer acts like he was shocked, and I'm like, how could anyone have been shocked?
Well, because they were in the middle of recording that record, like literally finishing. Well, okay, look, take opinions out of it, Russ.
Oh, I'm just saying. No, I'm saying they still had to know. They just knew that. They had to know that if this Unplugged thing was set up and staged solely so they could get a Kiss reunion, they had to know. Okay, we see where this is. I mean, I did. I was just a fan, and I had no insight or any special knowledge, but I knew, okay, this is going to happen now.
Like any session guy.
How can you not see it coming?
I have an opinion on that. So we have also said for handful of years, outside of maybe the last couple, that it always felt like Ace might return. Like there always felt like there was those little rumblings like, oh, Ace might be coming back into Kiss. Peter won't, but Ace might be coming back to Kiss. So the fans will always drum up a little extra something if we feel like it might happen. Oh, Paul did the thing with Ace. Oh, now Gene's doing co-writes with Ace.
Well,
it's looking like he might get back in the fold.
I don't think it's quite the same now because it's already happened, and we know. Again, we have the aid of the internet. There's so much more information is readily available, and a rumor gets put out there, and it's kind of becomes.
But
it catches fire much quickly. I'm just saying.
Let's look at it from the business side of it, though. If you're in the studio recording a record and as part of a record contract, regardless of what's going on the outside, them being business people, they probably still were working under the assumption, okay, well, they might run off and do a little reunion thing for a little bit, but we still have this record we've got to tour and release. They were probably looking at it from the business side going, well, we're at least secure for one more album cycle.
Well,
I don't think they were expecting the record to get shelved.
Allegedly, they were paid for another year as employees.
Thinking that they would do that.
Well, no. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, who's to say? I think that... the mistake Kiss made after doing the reunion tour was to continue, but we can talk about that another time. I mean, that one of the many mistakes they seem to make. I think it's interesting. I know we're running long here.
We're good.
I think it's interesting to note about their management situation now through the 80s and 90s. Is once they dropped Bill Coyne, all of a sudden he kind of just makes the offhand mark. We were basically self-managed. That's not
at the
exactly
time we were managing our own ship for a while.
They
had to have partners.
If I remember correctly, Howard Marks sort of became the de facto manager in the immediate interim after Bill Coyne, and then curiously, Paul Stanley's therapist,
by his own admission in his own book,
somehow took over managing Kiss. And this guy,
about that.
it's a bizarre story, and I don't remember all the details, but I think he kind of went missing with a lot of cash.
Yeah. That was my note.
I'm like, how does this happen? And then the great irony is they go to the reunion and they know they need new management. And who do they go to? Doc McGee. Now, how did he get into managing bands? Does anyone know his background?
Motley Crue, right? I think that was his first big fish.
Yeah, but how did he get into Motley Crue?
It was Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, and I don't know the
How
background
did he get into management?
I have no idea.
Well, he was a drug dealer.
Oh.
He's a fucking drug dealer. Ace Frehley, Peter Criss, but Doc McGee, he's okay.
Well, Russ, he's a functioning addict.
I didn't say he was an addict. I didn't say he was an addict.
I know.
He was a functioning, but that Moscow Music Peace Festival he put together was part of a plea deal to get out of a fucking drug rap.
I remember that.
I mean,
everybody's getting loaded on the fucking plane.
With, who, of course, it kind of makes sense. Who better to manage a band than a fucking, a big time. And he's a big time player.
Who better to manage Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, and
but you got to appreciate the irony.
Bands.
I'm not condemning him for it. I'm just saying you have to appreciate the irony of Gene and Paul being these, self-righteous. We're going to jerk off in public on our, on our straight edge. Blah blah blah. Oh, by the way, our manager,
No, and to clarify, I definitely wasn't trying to call him an addict. I was just calling back to
I
just
know,
that little bit. I'm clarifying for the listeners.
Oh, okay. But at the end, we'll wrap it up here unless y'all got anything to add. I just think
I had a couple small things. Another little small minutia bit. The USS Intrepid footage was not as clear as previous footage we've seen before.
I noticed that.
It looked like someone was almost filming it off a TV screen. Like it wasn't the high res stuff that we'd gotten in like
90s.
But it wasn't high res like it was in Second Coming.
I think that rights issues on that still would apply even if they were filming it off a screen. So I don't think that has anything to do with it.
It looked odd.
I think that as you're getting into the road stuff that they're kind of talking about again.
Before the end of the road stuff, what Cap was bringing up during the reunion, I found it funny that they found all the clips of Ace and Peter talking shit to Tommy filming.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
I love that.
See, that was fun because we haven't seen any of that shit either.
Some of that's on YouTube, but not that quality because, of course, Tommy has the masters. But yeah, I just love it. He's like, "Get the fuck out of here, Thea."
I want to read his stories of dealing with Ace and Peter's bullshit on that tour as a tour manager.
I'm sure it was difficult, but I just think at the end of the day, I think it's very telling of how they regard themselves coming out. Even in this, it's apparent in this documentary how they regard their status versus the 70s versus the 80s. The 90s they're irrelevant. They don't even count. There's no reason to even.
Well, there really wasn't much
over it so fast because it's the only thing that's relevant about the 90s is the fact that they reunited with the original guys.
But that was in 96.
I know. I'm saying, but that's when I say the 90s, I guess I mean the early 90s when it was just it has no bearing on anything anymore. It has no impact, no influence, nothing. It might as well never have happened. And the fact that they're continuing on with the two new guys in Ace and Peter's makeup rather than just dropping the makeup altogether shows a remarkable lack of integrity, which is fine because if any band has a lack of integrity, I guess it's going to be Kiss. I don't know. I just think that, you reach this end point and what you're celebrating is still, as much as you want to damn it and cut it down, is still what you did with those two guys.
Well, we couldn't have gotten to where we were without Ace and Peter, but we couldn't be where we are today without Ace and Peter still in the band.
I disagree with that. They couldn't maybe on a interpersonal level, but could they still be as a performing unit?
I don't think Peter
I don't think
could.
it would be. I don't think it would be good.
No, I don't think it would. Not at all.
I don't think it's very. But I mean, look at Paul. He's not good anymore.
No.
And that's not. I'm not trying to cut the guy down with that. It's just again, you reach your limitations. You got to know what your limitations are and know.
Well,
okay.
I mean, he knows his limitations. He's lip syncing now.
Lip syncing to a bad pre-recorded track, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think it's all lip sync. I mean, every band in the world's doing that now, and no one wants to acknowledge that. I mean, pre-recorded backing vocals and all that stuff.
I hate that shit too. That's blatant now too.
That's a standard of the industry now, and they're doing. I mean, club bands do it.
I hate it.
It is what it is. I like that. There's absolutely no mention of those last two albums they recorded again because they're completely irrelevant. Doc McGee, fake crying. I don't know. Maybe it is real crying. Maybe he's just crying over all that lost income.
What
crying is all that money.
What about Gene's moment at the very end?
I think that was real.
I do too.
And I guess it's fair to do this now. We can talk about this again later. But what after this ends? Thank God it's finally over. What's next?
The movie.
Maybe. I guess they're going to supposedly make some sort of movie about
biopic or whatever. Yeah.
But I'm saying, what's next for the guys in Kiss for real, though?
I won't steal your line because I know what it's going to be. But honestly, I think they're going to roll with Kiss 2.0. I think they're going to get all new guys. They're going to manage it. They're going to keep the brand going.
But who's going to pay to go watch that?
You would be surprised. The same people that are going to see this tour.
I can see it on a club level. I can't see it existing on an arena level at all.
I'm putting it on tape now.
But then again, Foreigner tours without any original members, and they can get it. Of course, but
I'm putting it on tape now. I can guarantee you, if they successfully pull off a Kiss 2.0 to where it looks and sounds good, they will sell out arenas. I can almost promise that.
I don't think so at all.
I think Gene can go out and do club tours by himself. Like we were talking about. He seems like he's genuinely upset that it's ending, and he's the only one that can sing well on stage and perform well, and I could see him taking a band on the road and doing select dates here and there.
And you know who he's going to do it with.
You know who the perfect guitarist would be?
Russ Ward.
It's gonna. I predict the Gene and Ace thing. They're not going to be headliners. They're going to be your special guest on all the shed
openers
shows
for Ace Frehley or opener for Alice Cooper tours and shit like that.
But who are you going to say, Alex?
Larger than that, I think they could probably. I think they. You
saying Ace?
Ace and Gene together.
Ace and Gene. Yeah, I can see that.
And they're going to be
in their own band,
in their own little band, opening on all the big shed tours every summer.
I'd go see that.
I'll probably go see it. It's probably gonna be better than seeing Kiss now.
Oh yeah.
I mean, as far as just as a musical unit.
Well, I mean, when Gene was doing those Vault tours,
Ace,
he was pulling up Ace to do a couple songs, and those were always fun to see.
Yeah. So who knows? I mean, they're a legacy act. It is what it is. Regardless of what any one person's opinion of how they're doing their shit. It's still.
It's the Vegas show.
Most people that are going to go see Kiss aren't necessarily Kiss nerds. They're not going to care about hearing, those deep track stuff that you wish you'd hear.
And that's why I think Kiss 2.0
Kiss
is going to be
2.0
successful.
will be okay, but I don't think they would be as successful as a modern Kiss.
No.
I throw out the argument that 95% or at least 75% of the people that are going to go to this End of the Road tour. This is actually this could be a completely separate episode. It's going to take us a while to get to it. Plus, we'll have more hindsight. But think about who's opening this tour: a painter. They are reaching a different demographic. Think about how expensive these ticket prices are and how expensive the VIP stuff is. And people have posted photos of the VIP things. It's bougie. It's nice. It's high class. They're reaching a different audience. They're reaching a banking audience that wants to have an experience. Kiss is the new Cirque du Soleil. It's the thing they all go out and experience because they've heard the thing. They don't know who's in the band. They see the makeup and they want to go see the spectacle. And that's why I think that's still going to be successful even without Gene and Paul.
Well, maybe. But that's the point I was making about why they didn't just drop the makeup once they lost Ace and Peter again for the second time or whatever. I agree. But that's what they're selling. They're selling, again, the whole thing exists because only for one reason: 70s Kiss. 80s Kiss is, I don't care. You can make any argument you want for it. It doesn't matter. Your argument's invalid. The only thing that anyone cares about are those four characters, whoever's portraying them. But I think a Kiss 2.0, I think it would do well. I just don't think it would do the same business.
They'll open for Foreigner 2.0, which is all different members too.
It is what it is. But we'll explore a lot more of that as we go on the continuing adventures of No Time to Turn, and you can join us next time as we continue our deep dives into the album by album, year by year. And thanks for joining us on this kind of long-winded, but we felt like it was apropos to check out this while
not
it was
too heavy on opinion, too much.
Yeah,
maybe toward the end.
A little bit. But
this is our opinion show.
That's what makes it fun.
But hopefully you'll join us as we continue, and we'll start exploring these in greater depths and hopefully probably greater opinion. But
especially when we get to the 80s.
Until then, for Cap and Alex, I'm Russ, and this is No Time to Turn.
Thank you for listening. Please insert another coin by supporting the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/somethinggoodnetwork.